So in this video, we're going to be looking at the ETAPE du Tour route for 2025. Starting in Albertville, finishing on Plagne. 135 kilometers with 4,500 meters of climbing. Of course, this route follows what will likely be one of the hardest stages of this year's Tour de France, and I'm going to be doing the ETAPE du Tour this year with a goal of finishing inside the top 15. Fairly ambitious goal, I know. But today I'm going to be showing you a comprehensive review and footage of the whole course, the climbs, the descents. We're going to go through some tips, some things to think about and remember if you're going to be doing this year's ETAPE. If not, then it might prepare you for the one next year. Sit back, relax, enjoy the video. If you're new, subscribe, and don't forget to like too. So before we kick things off, I want to give you a quick overview of our ride in numbers. Total time was 6 hours and 39 minutes. Normalized power 216 watts, which is roughly 3 watts per kilo. Average speed around 20 kilometers per hour. And also something to note was the average and max temperature being 23 and 27 degrees Celsius. The 4 or 5 climbs that you have to tackle during this route is going to be the Cormet de Roselend, the Col de Saisies, the Col de Prix, the top of the Cormet de Roselend, and then Plagne. Now we start in Albertville, of course, and we have to ride on a fairly wide, flat valley road to get to Eugene. This section of the route is going to be quite chaotic. There's going to be a lot of riders looking to get in good position for this first climb, regardless if you're at the front looking for a very fast time, or if you're in the middle of the pack, or even in one of the last waves. There will be staggered starts, and based on your finishing times estimated, you'll be given a wave to start in. Now obviously the later you start, the more you have to factor in hydration. You might be riding later into the day and when the temperature is at its highest. Now this first section of road, I would be very careful and be very aware of the people around you. And before you know it, you're going to be in Eugene and you're going to be hitting the first climb of the day. Now something we noticed on the Cormet de Roselend is how shallow the gradient is and how misleading that can be to a fresh rider. You don't want to be hitting that climb and riding way above your threshold or way above what you've set yourself to aim for the majority of the day. I would certainly think about breaking down these climbs and looking at what is really sustainable for you all day across all of these climbs. Particularly the Col de Prix and also Les Saisies, which is arguably the second climb, is going to be quite long as well. So you need to be riding within yourself, potentially 70 to 80% of FTP, and keeping on top of your effort. Now according to the Strava segment, the first climb is going to be 10.5 kilometers at 5%. It does get steeper in the second half, and there is a little bit of respite within the middle of this climb. So there is something to aim for. Get to the middle section, use it as a chance to eat and drink and gather some thoughts about how you're feeling halfway through this climb before you dig in for the second half. Now the descent off the Col de Roselend is actually quite a technical one. It was wet when we were there because it was so early in the morning, and the chances are when we come to ride it at the ETAPE, if there's been any kind of moisture, the sun won't get at this side of the descent. So I would say be very careful. It's the first descent of the day, so you're going to be nervous. People are going to be nervous descending. Be careful, take your time. It's a really short descent, so it's not really worth risking anything in my opinion, but just be careful. Now the second climb of the day, which is the first significant climb, is going to be the long drag to the top of Les Saisies. This is also the start and finish location of the infamous Tour de Mont Blanc Cyclo-Sportif, which I did the other year, and I'll link the video down below if you want to see it. It's an incredible day. We had to actually ride on the main road because of a route barrière, a diversion. So we didn't actually get to see the route that we will be taking in the ETAPE. So here's some footage of the actual main road, but it still gives you the same kind of idea as to what the climb is like up to Saisies. But on the other road, again, it's a very simple climb. It's just because it's going to be so long that you're going to have to pace yourself, of course. But it is one of those where, you know, I think the first few splits are going to start happening. So if you find yourself in a group, you know, that group could start splitting up more than halfway up the Saisies. And then when you get to the top, you're probably going to find yourself in a much smaller, more select group probably. Now, this is where you get the first, you know, real major descent of the day. Now, I wouldn't say it's a dangerous descent, but there's a couple of corners that, you know, certainly are a lot tighter than, you know, maybe you'd expect them to be. It's quite a fast descent in places, and towards the bottom, down into Beaufort, it's very straight and very fast. It's also quite a pedaling descent, I think it's fair to say. So, you know, don't be surprised when people come maybe past you, or you start going past people because you or they are pedaling. Although saying that, there's not much to gain. I would always say on a course as long as this, if you're going to be riding for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours, you know, use the descent to your advantage. You know, eat, drink, stretch a little bit. You know, you're only been going downhill for 20 to 30 minutes, and that's not long. So use it wisely. Now, a top tip as far as nutrition goes, and this is something that most of you should probably have dialed in by now, and the strategy, what you're going to be eating, and you should be practicing that already in your long rides, is how you're going to be fueling for what's coming ahead. You're always thinking about what's happening in the next hour. You know, what climb have I got coming up? You know, where can I eat on that next climb? Where can I drink? Where can I refuel? You know, when's the next feed stop? You've always got to be thinking ahead. That's how you stay on top of these things. And Adrian from Alp Cycles, who's been working on these events for 10 years plus, he always comes across people who have a fear of losing time because they don't want to stop at the feed station, or they don't want to stop for too long and eat and drink because they fear they're going to lose time because they're not moving. But actually, sometimes it pays. On a day as long as this, sometimes it really does pay, if you're struggling particularly, to just stop. Stop for 5 minutes, stop for 10 minutes, eat and drink something properly, let it sit and digest, and then get going again. So after the descent and you get down into Beaufort, it's important to realise that you literally only have about 3 kilometres of flat valley road before you're going to climb up the Col de Prix. And this climb is going to be, I think, the highlight of the day for lots of people. It was certainly the highlight of my day when we rode this today. We're on the last 7 kilometre section of the Col de Prix now, rather than going up the main road or the Cormet de Roselend. We're coming up, I guess, like the back way, and we pop out by the big kind of lake, which is fabulous, amazing views. But this section here now to there averages like 9-10% for 7k. It's gonna be a tough little section. I have to say though, I'm liking the route. I've loved the descent off the Saisies just now, and there's never really been any flat road. I have to be honest with you, it's been pretty much up or down. Definitely something to think about when trying to fuel and also push the intensity as well. So the Col de Prix can really be broken down into 2 sections, I think. You have the first kind of half where you do a couple of hairpins, and then you have quite a long straight section of road. You start climbing into what looks like a dead end, essentially. But then you get into the second half, which is just back to back to back hairpins. Now, to me, this section of the Col de Prix is going to be a really decisive moment of the whole event because it's quite steep. There's a good few kilometres where you're averaging close to 9%. And because of this, it's going to be selective. not just with the competitive riders at the front, but I think people who are now a couple of hours in, 3 hours in, 4 hours in, are now going to start to feel the effects of maybe if they haven't fueled correctly or haven't kept on top of hydration. And so the cracks may start to show in this climb. But mentally, I would keep in mind that once you get over this climb, you have beautiful views of, you know, the lake or the reservoir at the bottom of the Cormet de Roselend, or midway up. And then you just have the final 6 kilometer climb to the top of the Cormet. So mentally, once you get over the Col de Puy, you can give yourself that little bit of a reward and a breather that, you know, you're pretty much done, I think, one of the hardest parts of the course. Now, that's not even talking about the Plagne climb right at the end, because I almost feel like once you get there, you know, it's just, you just got to get to the top. It's that type of climb. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. This climb of the Col de Puy is a fantastic climb. It's packed with views. The hairpins are quite shallow in places, so it's a great chance for you to, you know, take inventory of how you're feeling and drink and eat. But it's actually one of the best climbs I've ridden. I really enjoyed riding up this climb. Now, one thing me and Adrian spoke about is tips for people who maybe have never done the ETAPE before. One thing that people sometimes don't realize is that the start and finish can be in 2 different places. And this is certainly the case in this event. Albeville and La Plagne are around about 40 kilometers away from each other. Now, if you intend on riding back to Albeville, which is certainly doable, there's certainly some good roads that you can ride on to get back. Obviously, if you don't fancy doing that, then the nearest town is Moutier to La Plagne. So you could potentially get down to Moutier, which would be almost all downhill, and then get picked up from there. Or of course, you would have to find a shuttle of some kind to get you back to Albeville. But it's definitely something to think about that people don't necessarily think about, is the logistics of what happens after the event. And there is actually a way to ride back to Moutier that I will link down below my Strava from today's ride, where I actually rode back to Moutier. You'll be able to see that I was on a cycle path for some of it, and also on and off a main road, which you're perfectly allowed to ride on. So check that out down below if you're interested in seeing this route. So now we've got to the top of the Cormet de Roselend, which is the second highest point of the route. We've done the Saisies, which is about 1700 meters, the Cormet, which is just under 2000, and now we're going up to La Plagne, which is around about 2000 meters above sea level. Now, we don't have the luxury of doing big altitude camps. We're not used to technically riding at high elevation, and I think I speak for the majority of us, and maybe even some of us Northern Europeans and people in the UK. We're certainly not used to riding close to 5,000 meters of elevation gain in a ride. Having said that though, it still doesn't feel quite like you're doing 5,000 meters of climbing. Myself and Adrian spoke about that in Bourg over a coffee once we got to the bottom of the Cormet. It was a strange sense of, you know, we've done quite a few mountains in order to get to Bourg, which is just about 15 kilometers before the foot of the last climb. But it doesn't feel like that, because you're climbing in 2 big chunks really. Col de Saisies, which is technically almost one big climb, and then the Col de Puy and the top section of the Roselend. I mean, that is also technically one big climb. You're going to be rewarded with a really beautiful descent broken down into 2 parts, and it's not super dangerous apart from that one corner where Johan Brunel crashed a good few years ago. But you also have the hairpins quite near the bottom as well, which are essentially just terraced like you wouldn't believe. It's back to back to back hairpins, and you have to be careful with how you enter the hairpins. You clip the apex, and just how they throw you to the other side of the road, because they're quite steep, and you almost don't realize how much they accelerate and throw you out when you come out of the hairpins. Something to bear in mind, but the descent is not overly dangerous. Don't forget it's going to be closed roads, and the top section of the Cormet is pretty wide and pretty open, and you don't really need to touch the brakes apart from, you know, when you can see a couple of the corners, a couple of the hairpins, but they are again quite wide, quite sweeping. This is the first descent where I think you really have to think about the weather conditions. Taking something with you like, you know, a rain cape would be adequate because it would cover you from, you know, rain of course, but it would also act as a windshield. So you tick both boxes without having to carry, you know, a gilet or arm warmers. Basically just carry one item, a jacket, and that will cover you for everything. But this descent takes maybe 30 minutes, 25 minutes, so you don't necessarily need to worry too much unless the weather is, you know, really dodgy. If it was like it was when we did it, it was getting warm halfway down again, so you didn't really need to put any extra clothing on. So then from Bourg to the bottom of La Plagne, you have the longest section of a flat road in the whole event, and it's approximately 10 kilometers, which is nothing. I cannot believe actually how little flat road there is in this event. So I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it certainly means that you've got a little bit of time to prepare yourself for the final climb to La Plagne. Now, Adrian peeled off and I did this final climb myself.
So the final climb to La Plagne is your traditional ski resort climb, I've been told. Quite a wide road, big hairpins, but it's pretty much 20 kilometers at about 7% with around 1400 meters of elevation gain. That's a big climb. Now for reference, it's nearly 5 p.m. So this is quite late in the day. So obviously you could be watching and you might be thinking that you might be getting to the finish around this time. Who knows what could happen on the day. It's around mid-20s. Temperatures around mid-20s. It's still warm. There's not much wind here at all. So if it's a little bit hotter in July, this could be tough.
But they were also resurfacing the road in places. It was gravel as well. That shouldn't be a problem going up, of course, but I think they're just preparing it ready for us and the Tour de France. But certainly I think that this climb is going to be the hardest climb on the route. You know, if you take out the Col de Prix, but equally, you know, the two of them, this one is just harder because you're going to be fatigued. You know, you're going to be tired. You might well be hungry if you haven't fueled correctly. You might well be thirsty. But as I said, you know, use the feed stations, you know, plan ahead, and, you know, don't let yourself get past that point. You know, because you don't want to be suffering, you know, through lack of preparation up that last climb. You want to be suffering because you're choosing to suffer. You know, you've fueled correctly, you're hydrated, you've paced yourself really well, you know, and ideally, you know, you're finishing strong, or at least, you know, you feel like you're catching people and you're not dropping off and you're not losing. You know, you can't produce any power or effort. You're not in control, you're just struggling to finish, and nobody wants that. But at the end of the day, you know, you can be on the ball all day and look after yourself and make sure you stay on top of things so that you can get to La Plagne in the best shape possible. Now, I'm not entirely sure where exactly it finishes, but it is going to be a 15 to 20 kilometer climb at 7 to 8%, which is substantial. You've got a lot of hairpins on the bottom section, which will definitely help you pass the time. But then, sadly, you've got a lot of longer straights in the second half, which are, you know, don't get me wrong, they are demoralizing. To give you some idea, I average about 4 watts per kilo up there, and it took me about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes.
It's weird that La Plagne is like a ghost town right now, but come the day of the etape, it's going to be absolutely bouncing, and you'd be lucky to get around or even down the mountain. But I'm going to go to the very top, just up here, and turn around But we're in the village now. I mean, finish is going to be around here somewhere, plus or minus 1 kilometer. But wow, what a day. Oh, here we go. Plagne 2000. There's a big old hotel up here by the looks of it. I mean, what a view. What a place to finish. Incredible climb. Well folks, all that remains to be said is thank you so much for watching. I hope this video helped in some way, provided some key info, or just filled you with even more nerves, but hopefully got you excited. If you're new here, please subscribe, like the video to let YouTube know that you enjoyed it and that you watched it all the way through. I appreciate this so much. Until next time, have a good ride at the ETAPE and take care. Oh.